In Module 2, we had discussed the importance of incrementality for housing design. We explained the terminology associated with this design strategy and explored it in detail through the case of B.V. Doshi's project for Aranya in Indore. But while Aranya is a very important case study, it is not the only notable case of incremental housing developed over the last few decades. In this section of the MOOC, we will share with you a few other examples, both in the developed and developing world. Let's start with one of the most celebrated cases, the Previ-Lima experiment, which was developed in the capital city of Peru in Lima in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Previ started as an architectural competition sponsored by the United Nations and Fernando Belaunde, the president of Peru at that time, who himself was also a trained architect. Eventually, it became a housing experiment, gathering projects from some of the most notable international and Peruvian architects of that time. In total, there were project submissions from 26 architectural offices, including acclaimed international names such as Oscar Hansen from Poland, Fumihiko Maki from Japan, Aldo van Eyck from the Netherlands, James Stirling and Christopher Alexander from England, and Charles Correa from India. The projects developed by all these famous architects included a strategy to accommodate growth and change. See, for example, the case of the project developed by Aldo van Eyck. After occupation by residents, each family took the job of expanding their homes in their own way and as and when they deemed fit. Almost 50 years after the project was first implemented, these houses look very different. In fact, it is these differences that illustrate how incremental housing strategies are important to enable people's initiatives in shaping their homes and to make them a living organism that adapts to the dynamic nature of life in cities such as Lima. As Correa had stated at that time, without malleability, you cannot have cultural expression. All you can get is a top-down notion of how people should live. But incremental housing strategies were not only developed in the developing countries such as Peru or India. At the same time that the Previ experiment was being developed, another remarkable case of incremental housing was being built on the other side of the world. This is the case of Skjetten Town, a new settlement projected for almost 2,000 households to be located on an area located in the vicinity of Strommen, approximately 20 kilometers from Oslo. The architect Niels Ole Lund was the coordinator of the team that won the competition for a new low-rise high-density district launched in 1965 by the municipality. While there were some multi-story blocks, including in the plan, the majority of households were accommodated in the expandable two-story, 6.4-meter wide row houses. The project of the row houses was based on a modular system, with a fixed core and multiple possibilities for expansion. These expansions, however, should be framed within the structural grid, using industrialized, factory-produced components to be assembled on site. To stress further the openness of the project, the designers created a house manual meant to support the residents' self-initiated expansions, demonstrating the possibilities of the system as well as the technical and economic implications. The motto of Lund's team-winning proposal was variation, order, community, privacy. This motto demonstrates the team's attempt to negotiate binary polarities, combining order with possibilities for individual expression and securing the privacy of each household while promoting a sense of community. The two examples of incremental housing discussed earlier are very specific and connected with a certain context. In the 1970s and 80s, however, incremental housing strategies were also implemented in the form of mass housing projects in the developing world. The Sites and Services approach, sponsored by the World Bank, is arguably the best example of this trend. During that period, there were more than 3 million houses built according to this model. A good example of this strategy is the Charkop Sites and Services scheme developed in Mumbai in the mid-1980s. The key features of this project are the design of the typical residential cluster and a clear hierarchical street grid and open space network. Each typical cluster included 35 plots, varying from 25 to 40 square meters. Despite the relatively small size of the plot, over time, each household could expand the house vertically, growing the habitable area incrementally with self-initiated expansions. Over the last 30 years, the projected incremental growth has happened as planned. Equally important is that the social, economic, and environmental qualities of the neighborhood were not undermined by this incremental growth. In fact, the opposite is true. Sharkop has now become a sought-after middle-income neighborhood with high levels of livability. However, by the early 1990s, not just in India but around the World Bank and other governmental agencies had moved away from developing sites and services projects, focusing their attention instead to enabling greater private sector participation in housing. A project that, in a sense, is an outlier to this trend can be found in Chile. In fact, this renewed interest in incremental housing can largely be credited to the visibility of the Quinta Monroy project, developed between 2003 and 2006 by the Chilean architectural office Elemental, headed by the Pritzker Prize-winning architect Alejandro Aravena for Iquique, a coastal city in north of Chile. In Quinta Monroy, Aravena and his colleagues developed an incremental housing approach based on the concept of the half house. In other words, the strategy was based on an allocation of the available resources to build a good quality initial core, which is roughly half of the house, and to let the residents build the other half by themselves. The four examples mentioned here are just a small sample of a wide collection of housing neighborhoods built around the world using incremental housing strategies. Next to its implications in housing design, incrementality is also an important aspect to rethink the participation of the residents in the design and development of their own dwelling environments.